again, and welcome to Lessons in JavaScript. And today we'll be going over some code in JS. My favorite tool is the JavaScript done in Visual Studio Code. So let's go ahead and get into it. Here, I've already shared my screen, and we're looking at this .js file that I've named alert. The reason why I named it alert because a lot of the output are alerts within the JavaScript, but we're going to do a lot of other things besides alert. But that was the main crux of the demonstration that I have here today. Just to get you familiar, alert is a built-in function within JavaScript that allows you to have a pop-up or dialog box show up and show a combination of strings and variable values. Okay, so let us go ahead and first start this lesson off by talking about the console.log statement here on line 6. Now let me see if I can increase the font. So that you can see it a little bit. I'm going to I know there's a shortcut way to increase the font. No, not exactly. Probably should have had that ready before I started the video. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and keep on moving forward with it. Let's talk about this console.log. So console.log is a different kind of output than the alert. Okay, I should have just made them all the outputs alert, but you're going to see a combination of console.log and you're going to see alert. So an alert is an output that shows up on the screen when that function is called. So that function takes in a string, and that string can also have what you want to be displayed in the dialog box. And it can include variables as well, variable values. Okay, so I defined this first statement on line 6 to be console.log saying hello student. So when we inspect the log, we should see, the first thing we should see is hello student. Okay, and then the next thing, when JavaScript goes to be interpreted, is this variable declaration says n is equal to 2. So all throughout this code, you're going to see n being utilized. And then we'll go on. And so we'll change this value from 2 to something else, maybe 0, maybe 1. But we'll change the value and see how it affects all the different outputs within the code or within the lesson. And then var is basically this keyword that indicates to JavaScript that to the interpreter that it is going to be a variable, something that could be a number, something that could be a string, something that can be a Boolean, all those data types that we may be accustomed to. So, but if you're new to programming, I apologize ahead of time if I'm leaving out some information. But if you do have any questions, feel free to put it down in the comments and let me know if I left out some information that I should have gone over a priori. But nonetheless, let's keep on going. So n is assigned the value of 2. So n equals 2 gives the value of 2 to n. The number one variable is given the value of 12. And then the name variable is assigned the string Harry. Okay, now we don't use Harry or, well, I think we do use 12 somewhere, but we don't use Harry anywhere. I just wanted you to see that we can assign a string. Also, we can assign a Boolean to the actual thing. And so we'll say the result can be true or false. And we can say true and assign it to true. We could change it to false if we needed to. So all these variable declarations show how you can use the blanket var keyword to assign value to a name. Okay. All right, so let's look at our first alert pop-up. So the first alert is just going to show that the file is linked. So this file needs to be linked to our HTML code. Let's go on over to the index.html so that we can see where it is linked. Okay, so we have this doc type HTML, it's the basic HTML setup, and it has in the header the meta char, the name, the title, and the link. Now this line 7 is a link to the CSS. But down below we're going to see a link to our JavaScript. And it's down here on line 45. So it says script src equals alert.js, and it has a closing tag /script. Okay, so that is where it is linked, and it's going to tell the HTML, hey, my script is going to come from this alert.js. So once it's linked, it'll have the opportunity to actually affect this alert. So file linked is just going to validate the fact that the file is linked to the HTML file. Okay? Next, we're going to concatenate the output while using the variable definition. Okay, so not only are we going to create a string, my favorite number is, but we're also going to use a plus sign, and that is the concatenation part. That just says I'm going to add to this string a variable called number1, and the star or the asterisk is actually a built-in operation for the power. So if we want to raise something to a power, it's a math concept that in JavaScript, we use a star to represent a power. So we're going to raise number1, which we know is 12 on line 10, raise it to the power of n, which right now is the power of 2. So if we change n, that's going to affect this alert. It's going to affect the favorite number. So we're going to watch for that after we run it. But right now, we're just reviewing the code. Now, line by line, get you to understand the different parts of JavaScript and different things that you can do with it. Okay? And I'm glad that we have a lot of alerts because I want you to see the different things that we can do within the alerts, the different variables that we can declare. And then we'll go into like functions. We'll review functions as well. Okay, so let's just continue. The next thing that we have is an alert on line 18 that says my favorite number. Okay, we did that. The next one, we're going to define an array of colors and display one in an alert. Okay, we're going to display one. So we got this variable called colors. All right. See, the var is kind of like a catch all for all different data types. So an array is another type of data, right? Although it's not one of your basic primitive data types, it is a data type that allows you to list a group of data. So here we have a bunch of strings. Now, the great thing about JavaScript is that you don't have to be limited to just a bunch of strings. You can do a combination of strings, numbers, booleans, what have you. It doesn't even matter. Okay. So right here, colors is red, blue, green, purple, brown, orange. We can list a whole bunch. And maybe later on we'll talk about how to add one. Well, let's just do it right now. No, that's gonna put me off the mark, and I don't want the video to be longer than it needs to be. So, but we'll talk about that later. Maybe we'll review the notes and see. Yeah, let's just go over to the notes real quick. In the notes, we'll see how to add an item to a list of to an array list. Okay, so here you see how I assign an array on line 85: red, blue, green, purple, brown, orange. Okay, another way to assign the array is to use the new keyword. The new keyword says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that this is coming up and give you some of my values. And if I want to add to the array, I can. Okay, so what the push function is going to do on line 92 is add to the end of the array, pink. Okay, so I just want to give you that quick tidbit before we move on. So let's go back to the index. So, no, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the alert. So so on line 20, no, is it line 20? Yeah, 21. We've assigned all the colors, and then we're gonna pop out an alert that says the next color is, and we're gonna put colors N. So N is in brackets, and it signifies the element of the array. Now I want to ask you, okay, if we change N to like 9, what do you think is gonna happen? Take a quick moment to think about 9. If N is actually the element index of the array, and we know that this colors has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, only 6 elements. What do you think is going to happen if we put in N equals 9, if we changed it to N equals 9? Okay, so in Java, you don't always necessarily going to get some blaring syntax error like you would when you have a compiler, because JavaScript is not a compiling language, it is interpreted. So it may interpret it and give you an error within the console log, and play around with that on your own time and see what that gives you. And let me know in the comments, okay? All right, so that is going to tell us when N equals 2, it's going to start off, since arrays are 0 index, means the index start at 0. Red is 0, blue is 1, green is 2. So since N is equal to 2, our output should say the next color is green. Okay, so that's the expected output. If it shows anything different than that, then we might be a little bit concerned. Okay, unless we change it. So if we change it to like 3, then we'll get purple. All right. Next On line 25, we have defined an array of numbers. Okay, I kind of mixed in floating point numbers as well as whole numbers or integers, just so you can see the different kinds, the different types. All right, so we got an alert, and the alert says the numbers are, and it should list out all the numbers in the array. Okay, because we just have a blank numbers. We don't have any indexes assigned, so it should just go ahead and list it out for us. Next, we have a displaying of the numbers sorted. So one thing about this sort command that I didn't really realize before was that when you do this sort, it forever changes the numbers. I mean, once it does go through and get to line 29, now numbers is no longer in the original order. Numbers is going to be sorted in sorted order. Okay, so just test that. Maybe at the bottom of your script, you can put down at the bottom another alert that that shows the numbers. So just do numbers as an output, either to the console or to the alert. That's fine, and see what it gives out. And I'm pretty sure you're going to see that it stays sorted. Okay, so once that sort command is, and that's a good thing to know, that once that sort command is called, it reassigns the array to a sorted list. Okay, so line 32 is a console output for the colors in the array that we already defined, and I kind of give like a little precursor. Now notice on this one, I didn't have a semicolon, and I'm glad I didn't, because I want to tell you that semicolons are optional. It's a good practice, but if you leave it out, it's not going to ding you. It's not going to be some compiler error that's going to shout out at you saying, hey, you forgot the semicolon at the end of this line. So that's a good thing. That's good thing to note, that semicolons are optional. Okay, now we're going to talk about loops. The console is going to loop through the colors, and it's going to show all the values of the colors. Okay, now mind you, we just finished doing numbers, right? We were able to just simply say, hey, do numbers, and it went through all of them and showed them. So why do we need this for loop? Just so you know that there's an iterative process that can take place. Say, for instance, you wanted to do every other index. You can do it using a for loop. When you know exactly how many are in the array, and you can know how many using the length attribute, then you can mix and match. You can go backwards. You can do all kinds of things with a for loop that help you iterate and do a group of steps, as opposed to just printing it out or displaying it out on the screen. Okay, so here in this for loop, let's break down this for loop into its different parts. First, you have the keyword for. Let you know that there's going to be some conditional values within parentheses that tell you when it starts, the condition for it to stop, and the way that it increments. Okay, where it starts, that's the var I equals 0. It starts at 0. What's the stopping condition? That's that I less than colored out length. As long as it's less than the length of the array, we're going to keep on going. And then we're going to iterate one at a time. The plus means just increment by 1. Okay, so what's going to happen is that we're going to use this curly braces to wrap our statements, the statements that we want to perform, or we want JavaScript to perform. We're going to put within the bracket to tell it, hey, we want to do this series of steps or instructions as we go along within each color. Okay, each element of colors. All right, so console.log colors I. So the colors I is just saying, hey, we're going to use that I as index value. We're going to use a value of I to determine which element we're going to display on the console log. So every single time you go through this loop, from the beginning to the end, from 0 to the end, we're going to display it on the console log. That's all we're going to do. Okay. Next up, we have console output that goes through the numbers and erases them to the nth power. So now more than just displaying them, we're actually going to operate on it. Okay. But this time we're going to use a for each loop. Now for each is unique because it just says, well, we already know we're going to do all of them. Okay. For says we can pick and choose which one we're going to do. Like if we incremented by 2, say we did I plus 2 instead of I plus plus, then we would do every other element, right? Until we get to the end. But in this case, the for each says we're going to do all of them no matter what. Okay, so it just says go through all the elements from start to finish. That's the default. Okay. So that's why we would choose for each as opposed to just the for, when you know you want to go through all of them and the index really doesn't matter. Okay. So we're not concerned with the index. We don't want to manipulate the index, so we'll use a for each because we're going to go through all of the elements in the array number. Okay, so we do a console log. That's just kind of like an indicator, hey, this is what we're about to do. The numbers raised to the power of, and then we just pretty much display what n is. And that's fine. That's kind of just like a header, okay? And so on line 41 is when our for each starts. So we're going to do numbers dot for each. So basically the numbers is the array that we're going to go through. So we have to say what we're going to go through, the variable name of the array that we want to go through. All right. And then we're going to define a function in parentheses that says, okay, we want a dummy variable of number. So each index of number is going to go into number and it's going to do the set of instructions here. So here's what's going to happen starting in line 42. We're going to display on the console number, which is the value of the number of that specific iteration, raised to the power of, we're going to write that string, and then we're going to say n, which is our variable, what power we're raising it to, and we say is another. So notice how we have like 3 plus signs concatenating variable, string, variable, string, variable. So this is a combination of variable, string, variable, string, variable, and allows us to write like a whole line broken up into parts, okay? And the parts are combinations of strings and variable values. So then at the end, we'll have the number star star or asterisk asterisk n, which says we're raising it to that power. So depending on what n is, that's the power we're going to raise it to. So later on, we'll, when we're looking at the output, we might change n so that we can effectuate the change of that. Okay. All right. Then we have a conditional statement within this. So before we close the braces, before we close the braces on line 48, we're also going to do an if statement. An if statement says, okay, if this condition is met, we want to basically work on this set of code within the braces. So within the braces of the if statement, it says do a console log, say numbers greater than 15. So basically there's going to be an analysis of the number that we're on within numbers. We're going to look at it. And if that number is greater than 15, then we're going to say, hey, this number is greater than 15. Okay? So basically it's going to analyze the numbers within that list of numbers. And each one is going to get checked to see if it's greater than 15. And if it's greater than 15, then it's going to print out, hey, it's greater than 15. Okay, so that's just a demonstration of the things that you can use as far as a conditional statement. Okay, so if in parentheses your condition, and there's more conditions that we can do, more operators that we can use, but this is just a very basic, and then we'll go later on and combine other operators as well, or include other operators, more advanced operations. Other than greater than, there's less than, there's, you know, less than or equal to, and things of that nature. Okay, I just wanted to give you a brief basic demonstration. So now we're going to talk about the switch case statement. Okay, so after you've done or gone through all the numbers and listed them out, raised them to the power and check to see if it's greater than 15, and we're gonna go ahead and go through the colors again. So we're gonna go through the colors, and this time, color, we're only gonna check one color, right? We're gonna check the color that's in the nth element. So it says switch, and in parentheses, we're going to say, what are we checking? So the checking is the variable that we are checking. We are checking the nth element of colors, all right? The n is 2, so we're checking the third, because 2 is going to give you 0, 1, 2. We know it's a 0 index array. So it's the third element of the array that we're going to check and see what it is. And cases, these are all the cases that we expect it can be. And if for some reason it's not any of the cases, we have this thing called the default. And the default allows you to give like a generic or default answer to the switch case. Okay. So in our case, the default says, hey, if it's none of these colors above, we're going to say taste the rainbow. Okay. And so if it's red, we'll say roses are red. If it's blue, we're going to say violets are blue. If it's green, we're going to say grass is green. If it's orange, we say candy corns are orange. Brown, what is brown? Purple, blueberry turns oatmeal purple. And that is it. Now, the break statement says, hey, after you figured out that that's the one you want, you do what it says, and then you get out of the case statement. There's nothing left to do. So break is like a way out of the switch case. All right, so that is the switch case. And you can look at that syntax so you know how it's supposed to look. And that's the whole essence of code review. It's just making sure you know what the code is supposed to look like and determining how you use it in your particular project and how you would go about answering your own specific requirements. Okay. So if you were asked to do an array of something, or you just needed to filter through a whole bunch of information, you might want to set up an array depending on how the information is set up. Now here, the next thing on line 72 or 73, we have a person variable. What kind of variable is this? It starts out with a squiggly or a curly brace. And then it lists all these things: first name, last name, age, children, address, and then full name. What this is an object literal. So we are literally defining an object called person, and every person, the variable person has all these attributes in them. So the attributes have a name and it has a value. Okay, so first name has the value of Stacy, last name has the value of Joseph, age has the value of 44. Children is actually an array of strings, Yuri, Unique, and Uriah. The address is here, and it has a street, a city, a state, a zip. Hold up. That looks like another object. So we have an embedded object within the object of the person. So within the person, we have an object called address, and it also has these name and value pairs. We call them name value pairs to show that that's how we define an object. Okay, so it has street, city, state, and zip. And then the next, notice that there's a comma after every definition of stuff except for the last one. The last one doesn't need a comma. Okay, and so the very last thing on line 84 you'll see is a function. So you can define a function within an object literal. And the unique thing about this is that you put the name first. Normally in a function, you will say function, the keyword, and then you'll say the name of that function, and then in parentheses, any parameters, input parameters that you'll have. This function in particular doesn't have any input parameters. It just says, okay, when I call full name, this is what's gonna happen. It's gonna return this dot first name. So this refers to person, all right? This is kind of like a placeholder for what the scope is all about, or what you're referring to. In this case, we're referring to person. So this refers to person. So the particular person's first name, the particular person's last name, both of them is going to be concatenated with a space in between. And that's what it's going to return. It's going to just basically return the full name. Okay, does that make sense? All right, good. All right, so next thing on line 88, we're going to basically utilize some of the things that are in person. So we're going to say in the console log, we're going to write out person.first name is person.age years old. Okay, so basically this is saying Stacy, which is the value inside first name of the person, age, year old. Now, what if we didn't know, or what if we wanted to change the value? We're going to do that later. Change the value of these first name, last name, and things like that. So we're going to do that later on. But let's keep on going, and we'll say console.log, person.last name, family has, person.children.length. Notice the person.children.length is the attribute that tells you how many are in that array. Well, we can count it up there and say there's 3 children. So when we actually run this code, line 89 should say that the Joseph family has 3 children, right? That is the expected output. Now we're going through this line by line so you can see what it looks like to concatenate, to do the console log, to basically show all these different attributes and ways to do objects and arrays and all those things, so that when the output comes, you know that this is the expected output and it actually showed up that way. That's the great thing about code review. We talk about what's gonna happen before it happens. And if it doesn't happen, then what do? We have to figure out why it didn't work. So that's a good way to debug. It's just first review the code line by line, make sure that it is what you want it to do. And then you look at and you can inspect the results to see if it in fact did what you asked it to do. Okay, so here we have an array of objects. Oh, I skipped 90 and 91, didn't I? Let's go back to that. In 90, it says they live in person.street.address.state. So it's just going to tell you what state they live in. So we basically dig down into the person, went to the address, and then went a step further into the state that they live in and displayed that to show what state they live in. Okay. 91, so then to break down or dig down deep into a person object, you use the period between each name. First you start with the name of the object, then you go into the name of the the name of any of the attributes of the object. In this case, that attribute address is another object. And so you can go down one step further into that to find the state. Okay. So 91 says by, and then the person's full name. So basically this is where we're actually calling our full name function that's in our person. All right, so then whenever we call a function, if we don't have any input variables, what we want to send to that function call, then we're going to just use open close parentheses. So notice on line 91, we have open and close parentheses after the full name is stated. Okay, after the function call, open and close parentheses. If there's any parameters that we need to include, we'll put it inside the parentheses. But for this one, there are no input values, so we'll just leave it empty. And then we'll end up with a semicolon, which is, again, is optional. So just keep that in mind. But it is a good habit to have. Putting the semicolon at the end. Okay, then next we're going to talk about the array of objects. So array of objects is basically exactly what it says. Okay, so array, we put in brackets. We separate each element with what? A comma. And so between the commas, we have objects. And objects is defined within curly braces. So that's why you see the curly braces, and with that, they don't have specific names. These objects do not have names. They are just elements in the array. Guess what? The number or the index is kind of like their name. So when we reference an object within this array, we're going to use the index. Okay? So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily see a name like we did with person, right? But we are going to reference it using the index. All right, so the first index 0, has a username, Stacy Lulu's, and has a code. So notice that all of these have usernames and code, username and code. Could we have defined other things inside there besides username and code? Yeah, but for the intents purpose of users, every user has a username and code. And notice that it looks like a 4-digit code. Now, there's nothing to say that it couldn't have been a 5-digit code, 6-digit code. Whatever the case may be, you define it how you want to for your purposes, okay? All right, this users can be used to validate somebody's login. So just keep that in mind, reasons why we would use these certain objects or array of objects. Moving right along, we're going to utilize the username and the code in a console log on line 107. So we're going to call a combination to be the username at N at the index n, and I use index n so you can see that we're referencing only one. So once again, what happens if n changes to like 9? Okay, I want you to think about this and keep it in the back of your mind, because we are going to change the value of n, but I want you to know how that's going to affect all the variables that actually, all the cases that actually use n. Okay, so if we change it to something like 9, we're going to be out of bounds, right? We don't have a 9th user. So just keep that in mind and see what happens. All right, and we're going to check the output when we change n to 9. Notice I keep on saying 9. Actually, that's my favorite number. But we're going to choose 9, and we're going to go through and see what happens to our output. Okay, so next we are going to do a function called doClick. Okay, what to do when you click? We're going to send an alert that says, you just clicked the button. So that kind of tells you, it's a good little indicator. Yay. We send an alert, say we click the button. So doClick, I'm gonna switch over to the HTML file in just a second. doClick is going to send an alert that you click the button. So what do you think is gonna happen? Or what do you think is gonna cause this alert to come out? When would we say you just click the button? Well, when you click a button. So we're gonna have a button in the HTML, and when you click it, it's going to send an alert. Let's go ahead and look at that now. Let's find doClick. Line 17 is where we have doClick being called. Notice it's called within the button. And we have a keyword or and a selector called onClick. So besides the word selector, let's call it an event. Okay, so this event is an onClick event, and when it is triggered by clicking on this button. When you click on the button, it calls the doClick function. Notice it says doClick, and it has open and close parentheses. I want you to remember that this name is case sensitive. So if for some reason you have a capital D-O-C-L-I-C-K, and all of a sudden you run the program and nothing happens when you click, it's because you didn't have the appropriate syntax. It wasn't in the right case. So I want you to keep that in mind when you're going to debug your program, when you're trying to figure out where you went wrong, why it's not working. That is going to be almost like your number one troubleshooting step, is to look at your case, your names, because JavaScript is case sensitive. It might still be doClick with a capital D, but it's not the same doClick that's in the function in the script. Okay, so make sure that you are keeping your function names the same as your event names in the HTML. Okay, all right, so what is the button gonna say? It's gonna say click this after checking the log. So basically it kind of like guides you through the lesson and tells you when to click it, what to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be that specific. It could have just been say, click this or click now or something like that. You could have made it say whatever. But this is more descriptive. I chose to make it descriptive so you can see. So it doesn't have to say click this after checking the log. It can say anything. It could say booty. I don't know why I thought of that. It could say anything. All right. It could say button. You know, it could say anything you want it to say. All right. Next on line 18, we have another button. And it basically is descriptive. So when you're choosing your names of the functions, this kind of helps you to figure out what it's doing by giving it a very descriptive name. Change H1. Now, that tells you, hey, I'm going to change header 1 because the header 1 tag has an ID of heading. We're going to go back to our JavaScript and see where that's being used. All right, so let's continue on. After this first do click function, we have the change H1 function. Go figure. Okay, so, and guess what? The order doesn't matter here. The order does not matter. You could have put change H1 ahead of do click and it still would search the script for the right function to actuate. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's not based on order. Okay, so so the next thing we say inside the change H1 function, we define a heading. Notice heading has the same name. It's just so that you can track what you're doing and make sure this variable name heading is going to help you see what you're using within the HTML. You're using the heading, and the heading is notice we did use an ID of heading. So that's where it's going to look for, look at line 112, look for an element by the ID. And so we define an ID. So get element by ID is a function that looks into and refers to something in the HTML, right, that has the name heading. So it's going to look for it within the HTML heading. So we define an ID named heading. So I want you to see where it's linked. A lot of people have trouble linking the HTML to the JavaScript, and this is the key link. Okay. Get element by ID. Make sure that you have ID defined. If it's not defined, it's not going to know where to find heading. Okay. You might be wanting to change the heading all day, but if you don't have an ID defined in the HTML, it's never going to find it. Okay. All right. So we define this variable, and basically it's an element ID. So we assign the value of that ID to heading. Okay, so it makes sense. With that ID, we want to attach it to this variable heading. And we're going to use heading, the one we just defined, and we're going to look at the inner HTML, basically what's within the brackets. The inner HTML is what's between the front tag and the ending tag, inner HTML. We're going to assign it lesson 1 completed. Well, currently the heading, let's look at it. Currently the heading, let's look for the see the ID heading. What's within the inner HTML, what's between there, it's going to say learning JavaScript. We're changing it, right? We're changing it in our JavaScript to say lesson 1 completed. So when we call change H1, we're going to be changing it to lesson 1 completed. We could have changed it to anything. We could have said, yay, hooray, congratulations, you have earned your certificate, or, you know, it could have said anything, all right? It could have said, you're a schmuck, or you're an idiot, or anything to that matter, or you're the best thing since sliced bread. Whatever you want to put in the inner HTML, you want to change that header, this is where you would do it, in the inner HTML, okay? After, notice in the same block, and this may not be good programming practice, because why would you show the date after you change it? Well, if you want to know when you actually completed the course, it's a good time to do it. right? So show date actually tells you, actually a call to another function. Now we just call the function within a function. All right, so that basically tells you you can call a function within the function, and what it's going to do, it's going to call the show date function, and the show date function, good thing it's next, because we want to be trying to jump down to find out where the show date function is. So on line 116 is the show date function, and basically the show date function assigns the element ID time. Where is time at in our HTML, in our document? Let's go and see. Let's find the time. Oh, it's in this div called header. And basically, right underneath where the learning JavaScript is going to turn into lesson 1 completed, right under there, it's going to show the timestamp. Notice it says time. But right now, the inner HTML is what? Blank. So guess what? You can define an HTML tag with an ID and leave it blank, and then later on, fill it. Isn't that awesome? So you can have placeholders within your HTML. And then when something happens, another thing, it triggers it, and then something else changes it. Okay, so notice when time is clicked, the inner HTML is going to change to show date. What is it going to show? Well, let's go back to alert and see. It is going to show the date. So time.innerHTML, now the date is a built-in function that shows the date and time stamp. And we're going to see all this come to play when we actually run the code. But right now, we're just reviewing the code. We're talking about it. We're making sure we understand what the syntax looks like, what we can expect, and why it happens. Okay. Some people choose to do it other ways. I want you to see the dynamics of it, of the actual syntax before we actually start looking at the results. We want to talk about the expectations, what the code is doing, what the code looks like, the different functions, the predefined functions, and then the ones that we are defining, how they come together, and how we link them between the HTML and the JavaScript. Now, we haven't really talked about CSS. We're going to only affect one thing of the CSS, and we're going to do that right inside of our function. So, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so show date, we show the date timestamp in the inner HTML right underneath that first header, and we're going to make it a header 3 tag. Okay. Next, we're going to hide the student. When are we going to hide the student? Well, wherever there's a student ID. If we see a document that has the ID student, we're going to be able to hide the ID there. Hide the student at that time. And hide the student basically just says, hey, change the inner HTML to nothing. Empty quotes. So we just have 2 quotes with nothing in it. It's just going to be nothing. So we basically hide the student, meaning we change that inner HTML to nothing. Okay, that's easy enough. Let's look at the HTML and see where the student ID is. Oh, here it is. Right here within, it's embedded. And it's an H6. It's a header 6. Now, do we have to make it a header? No, we didn't necessarily have to make it a header. We could have just included it with some other tag. We could have made it a hyperreference. We could have did anything within this, but I chose the H6 to show. We're going to show the student. We're going to show the student right there in between. The thank you. So we're going to say thank you to somebody for joining Stacy for a JavaScript lesson. This is the first of many lessons. So you can view the console output by pressing the F12 button on your keyboard. So when that paragraph displays right inside that paragraph after the words thank you, we're going to show the student. Okay. So That's what's happening with that particular function, hide student. So we're going to take away that student name. We're also going to be able to show the student name. So that's the next function on line 124. So we're going to show student. So we're going to be able to show and hide who the student is. Now, we can keep it blank at first. And then when the user enters their name or enters their username and password, we can have a registration form so that they can register and put in their username and 4-digit PIN, right? They can create. So we can do a create user form and append it to our list, our array of objects. We haven't done it yet, but that's one way that we can expand on this code, okay? So just keep that in mind, how we can play with the code, how we can maintain the code, how we can maintain these functions. Notice these functions have very little in them. They have some basic things that we're doing. We're assigning the ID, and then we're changing the inner HTML in most of these. So I want you to keep that pattern in mind. But also, we can expand and do a lot more things. Kind of like when we pull the show date, we can also call other functions within functions. But then that gets kind of messy. We want to keep our concerns separate. Okay, so sometimes less is more. So keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's look at show student. And okay, so it's continue. It's a student ID. It looks for the student ID, and then it changes the inner HTML. Notice I don't know if you noticed, but the inner HTML was blank. Okay, for that H6, the inner HTML was blank. And so it's going to fill it in. But here, it's going to fill it in with users and that username. So basically, it's going to go look for users array. It's going to look for the nth element of users, and it's going to put the value of username in that inner HTML. So it's assigning the inner HTML to one of the users. Which user? In our case, it's n equals 2. So it's going to be that third user. I'm going to ask again, what's going to happen if you put a 9? It's going to blow up every time, because a lot of these do not have a 9th element. Okay, so just keep that in mind, what's going to happen. We're going to check it out. All right, so function, change background. Hey, when this function is called, it's expecting an input. Now that's different. We haven't been pulling in any parameters up until now. So we're expecting a value to come into this change background. So we want a value, and that value we're gonna write it to the console. Sorry about that. We're gonna write it to the console. We're gonna say the background color is whatever was brought in, the value that was brought in, the value of X. And then not only that, we're gonna change the body. So that's what's being changed. The body is being changed. The body of the element that has the ID body. Okay, so within that body, there's a style, and that style has a background color, and that background color is going to be assigned whatever the value is. So I am guessing that that value X has to be a color. Maybe. Let's look at the index, the HTML, and see what that, we need a color, right? In order to change the color, we need a color. So it should be expecting a color. So if you put something that's not a color in for X, what do you think is gonna happen? Probably gonna use some weird error message or something. There is no background color called purple, you know, like if you misspelled purple. or if there's not a color in the list of background colors, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you have all your syntax and all your spellings correct. Okay, look over here in line 34, we have a label called background. And it's a select. This is something we haven't done before, a select. So we're gonna select from a list of options. Notice there's options here, line 37 through 40. There's some options. We have red, blue, green, yellow, all of these different options. And they're described with their color. So notice that these are lowercase. That's what the CSS would expect. And notice these are uppercase. That's just the display name. Okay, what's showing up as an option. All right, so we have values. So this is a keyword that kind of tells you what we're talking about. We're talking about the selection. We're talking about the option that is selected. This is the option that is selected. So when a person selects one of these values, one of these options, the value is going to be put in this. Okay, so this, the context is going to be placed into onChange, and onChange is going to, so when it changes, so every time that a user selects a different color, the background is going to change to that color. So we're going to be able to toggle between a red background, blue background, green, black background, and a yellow background. Okay, so that's what's happening there. We have a select, and it has an ID of background. So look at it, it says background. All right, so let's go back to the learn and notice that we didn't use the background, we used body. So it's going to look for the ID body, and it's going to change the body, because that's the one that has the background style. That's where we want to change the background. We could have changed the color of the header. We could have changed the color of anything. The paragraph, we could have highlighted the paragraph a certain color. So this styling, we could assign to any of them as long as we change the ID, or we assign the ID and give it a descriptive name that makes sense and assign it to a variable. So we're attaching the ID of the HTML element to a function's variable. That way we can use that variable. This is where we use it, line 131. And then we can break down into the HTML CSS inline style and go down into the background color. So we're declaring what the background color is. So that's a function within it. And assign it the value that was brought in. Okay? So we assigned the value that was brought into the function, change background. And that's what makes it change. All right? Almost done, guys. Almost done. So the next thing we want to do is we want to validate this form. All right? Validation is one of those things that we use when we go to log in or we fill out a form. Make sure that, number one, if the field is left blank, hey, hold up, wait a minute. We can't do anything with that. We need the field to be filled in. So we're going to alert the user, hey, idiot, put something in there, you know. So we can definitely send alerts if the first name is null, if it doesn't have anything in it, or if it's blank. This is one of those things. This is an expanded if statement. And this is one of those operators. This is a comparison operator to check if the left is the same as the right. And this is the operation comparison that says or. So this can be true, or this side could be true, for the whole thing to be true. And then the first name, we're checking. We're comparing the first name to a blank. And if it's blank, then we're going to send out this alert that says, hey, the first field is empty. Please fill it in. You could have said anything like first name required, anything you want to say to the user in the alert, you can put it here. And you'll return false. Okay? And then next, you want to check if the first name. Now notice validate form, we're only validating the first name. How do you think we can expand it to make sure we validate the last name as well? Oh, we don't want to leave that as an exercise to you to do to validate the last name. Okay. So we'll do that. Check the first name is less than 3. So we're looking at the length of the first name. And if it's less than 3, that means it's short. That can't be a name. Well, there are two character names like Lee, a lie. But well, we're not gonna, we'll make sure that they have to put in like a number or some other character if they have a short name like that. Otherwise it's an initial, right? It's not really a name. So there are some 2 character names. But we're gonna just go with this validation constraint. Make sure that if it's less than 3, to say, hey, the first name must be at least 3 characters. So that will force the user to input or enter something that's more than 3, or 3 or more. All right. So there you have it. That's validate form function. And basically it looks at the forms. So let's inspect line 134. I didn't really talk about that too much, but notice here, document.forms. Forms is a keyword that hey, we're going to search for forms within our HTML. We're going to search for the form that's named my form, and we're going to look for the first name and the value of that first name. Okay, so we put it in brackets because they're kind of like array elements. Kind of. It's just the way that you search for the form. So just remember this method of referencing the forms within your HTML, okay, and assigning it. Notice that this document.keyword is in all of these. So this is universal. This document is referring to our HTML. Okay, this is the major link between the document, the HTML, and the JavaScript. So when we assign elements of the HTML document to a variable, we can start effectuating change. Okay, so tell me, what are your questions? Before we get into the next step of looking at the results, just drop a comment and whatever your questions are before we even get started, maybe just so I know where your mind is at before we actually even go into the output and discuss the output. Okay, I think we changed it, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the save button, and I'm going to click on run, and I'm going to run without debugging, and that might take me to another screen, so I might have to change my screen share, because I don't think you'll be able to see it. So let me see. I'll stop the share, and I'll share my screen to the output. So my output is actually going to be Google Chrome. Okay, there it is. So notice, first thing it says is this page says file linked. I hope you can see that. File linked. So you say okay. When we click okay, it's going to go to the next thing. It's going to go to the next part of our script that says, this page says my favorite number is 144. Remember all those alerts in our JavaScript? Okay. So it's running through all of those alerts. Okay, it says this page says the next color is green. Remember, n is equal to 2. And remember we talked about it being green. So the second element is green. There's a lot of different things that you could do with it. If you wanted to go, the next color is red, next color is yellow, next color is purple, whatever. But that's just the alert that we set up. Next thing, it says the numbers are. So basically we said numbers and it lists all the numbers in that array. Okay. Next, the numbers in order are 1, 11, 15, 8. Are they in order? Hold up, 5 is here. We're gonna drop a comment, okay, and tell me why is 5 all the way over here and not between 1 and 11, okay? All right, so notice, after all that was done, then we have everything popping up into our document. Our header, the paragraph, the buttons, and our little form. Okay, so it says learning JavaScript. It says thank you, Justnique. Guess what Justnique is? Justnique is that username, the second element of the users, right? And the username is Justnique. Juzztnique. For joining Stacy for a JavaScript session. This is the first of many lessons. You can view the console output by pressing the F12 button. Okay, I'm going to press F12. Nice. Notice how it splits the screen. It splits it vertically. Some people like to see it at the bottom. I like to see it kind of side by side. So it's split vertically, and notice it's already in the console log. That's because I've done it a few times. Sometimes if you see it in the Elements tab, you might want to change over to the console so you can see what's in the console. So make sure that, don't freak out if you see all these elements and you're like, okay, well, where's my output? There's a console tab and you want to click on console so you can see your output, your console output. Okay, so remember that hello student. That's number 1. Then next we said the colors in the array. It goes down the list: red, blue, green, purple, brown, orange. It goes through all the colors. And then it says the number raised to the power of, and it tells you what n is, 2. And so what it does, it says 1 raised to the power of 2 is 1. 11 raised to the power of 2 is 121. So on and so forth. Up until you get to 18. Notice 18 is greater than 15. So remember that conditional statement that says, hey, if it's greater than 15, go ahead and print out it's greater than 15. Bam. There you have it. So all the elements in that and those numbers, if they're greater than 15, it's going to say it's greater than 15 because it goes through that conditional statement every single time. And then the grass is green. Oh, hold on. And the great thing about this alert date, as it tells you what line it's referencing. So it says undefined is 44 years old. What? So we're going to inspect that a little bit later because we shouldn't have anything undefined. What is it that we're trying to say is 44 years old? It's the person object we created. So something is happening where it's saying it's undefined. So we need to figure that out because Java didn't scream at us. It didn't give us like this blaring error. It just said it's undefined. Here you go. So although we didn't get an error, we still need to see why it's not giving us a name. All right, and we'll check that in a moment. And it says Joseph family has 3 children. So remember, it looked to see the length of the children's array, and it put that there, and then it said children. That's that concatenation going on. And then it says they live in, and it gave the state. So that's where we dug down deep into the object within the object to find the state that that person lives in. Okay, and then by, and then it says the first name, last name. What else could we have done? We could have did a full name function. We could have called a full name function or something to that effect. There's a lot of different things that we could have did there. But that's okay, we did that. And then combination 2, basically is a combination between the ID and the username. All right, next. Oh, what happened? I moused over to show the student. No, I should have changed it to hide, because when I moused over this, then the username went away. Notice that? I don't know if you noticed. Maybe if we refresh the screen, you'll see. But remember, this the just Nick was showing before, and now it's not there. Now, this says click after checking the log. Okay, we checked the log. We looked at all our outputs and everything. So I'm going to click this and see what happens. An alert pops up and says, you just clicked the button. Yay! And that's exactly what we wanted to happen. We wanted that alert to pop up when we click the button. All right. Now, this could have said anything. So just think about whatever design that you want to have on your page. If you wanted to effectuate a button that said something when you click it, you can do this alert. Okay. A lot of designers, they work from a pseudocode. They work from what they want to happen, right? The output. This is what I want my output to look like. And so getting from the output to the actual script is what we're going to learn next. Okay, so we're doing code review, but I also want you to go from requirements or pseudocode or prototype to the actual script. All right, so but I digress. So we're gonna click OK because we saw the alert. Every time we click on it, it should do that. Okay. All right. Well, we're not finished with the lesson, so we're not gonna hit finish lesson just yet. All right. We're gonna put in the name. What is your name? We'll say new student. New. It's 3 characters long, right? Oh, what if we put in forgot the W? And then we'll put student. Like, it doesn't really matter. This could be blank. It could be spelled wrong. It could be all kind of crazy. It could be whatever, right? And then we want to change the background. So let's check blue. Ah, look at that. It made the background blue. So that's nice. And when we submit this form, it's going to go through the validation. And if something happened in our form validation, then it's going to tell us, hey, mess up, fix it. So when we hit submit, oh, the first name must be at least 3 characters. Try again. We're not going to submit the form until you get it right. All right, so we put in new student. Put in that W when we hit submit. Boom. It goes to something.php. Okay. When I go back, it starts the script over again. It goes through all of these things. It'll go through the JavaScript. Let's just finish the lesson. We finish the lesson. What happens? Lesson 1 completed. It gives a timestamp, just like we said when we call the date function. It says Monday, September 4th at 6:35 GMT 05 minus 0500. Central Daylight Time. So whatever your time, it's probably going to be different. But it says exactly when you did it. Okay, so sometimes it's good to have that daytime stamp. Take a snippet of it, show your instructor. Me, if you wanted to send it to me, that's fine. Send me a little snippet. Put it in the comments. Let me know that you worked out this lesson. You did all the steps. You can put your name in the username field. You can do whatever that's customized to yours. A lot of times I like when I'm going through a lesson, I'll put my information, I'll put my little spin on it, just to show that it's versatile and I can utilize different names and everything like that. So it's not, it has to be the same exact way, but the concept needs to be solidified in your mind of how to do it, how to go about doing it, okay? And the syntax. Now remember, the semicolons are optional. Certain things, you can comment your code so they can see what's going on and what's to be expected in that particular section or function. So that's a good practice to have. And debugging, I forgot. We still have this undefined here. We need to go to line 88. What's going on in line 88? Notice in line 88 it says console first name, dot first name. Oh my goodness, look at this. It's a lowercase n. Remember I was saying it's case sensitive? So it's looking for first name. First name is undefined. We didn't define anything called first name. We defined first capital N name, right? So let's see. We can change it here, but that's not going to change the whole thing. It's not going to change it in our code. But I just want you to see it since I'm sharing this one, how that can effectuate. Change that. Let's see if we can refresh it. See if it will change. Or what I can do, okay, it's still undefined. So what I'm going to do in mine, I'm going to change it, line 88, and I'm going to change it to a capital N and save my file so I can show you that it does affect this program. So we're going to restart the page. I know these alerts can be kind of annoying, but I just wanted to include that in the demonstration. All right, look at it. It says Stacy is 44 years old. All right, so we have a little formatting glitch here. We might want to put a space before years old, just so that there's a space between the 44 and the year. So that's a small thing. We can fix that. So as an exercise, you can do that. And also include your validation for the last name. Do some validation, make sure it's at least 3 characters. And yeah, actually have something there. So if you expand on this code that I'm going to leave down in the description or include my, then you'll be able to, you know, start getting used to how to go about maintaining code. You know, I think this is the best way to like go, because when you go get a job in the real world, you're a lot of times, I'm not gonna say all the time because you might have to start from scratch, but I think 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be starting off with somebody else's code. And you're gonna have to maintain the code. You need to be able to be really, really good at code review. And I found even in when getting my certification, a lot of percentage. I'm not going to say exactly what the percentage, but a huge percentage of the questions were code review. You have to know how to look at the code and see what it's doing. All right. And so that's why I think this approach to learning JavaScript you know, is good. Let's discuss it. Let's see what it should be doing, and then let's see what it does do, and we'll do the comparison of the two. This one had very minor errors and minor problems, but sometimes you might end up with like a very rainbow colored output. If you go to coding, and then you try to test it, and then you say, oh my gosh, what now? I have this whole big old mess. But I think code review and making sure the code does what it says it's going to do is very beneficial to approaching JavaScript and maybe even any language, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope this was very helpful to you and you were able to understand the different components, elements, and things that I discussed. If you do have any questions, comments, feel free to drop them. Subscribe to my channel. Give it a like if you liked it. If you didn't like it, you know what to do. All right, thanks. And we'll see you next time.